This is BreakAway Kingdom Hub. And today I want to talk to you about what I like to call the 6-day creation process. And this comes from Genesis chapter 1. Sometimes God will speak to me in a very abstract way. And I feel like this is one of those. And I'm going to share a little bit of what God does with me when it comes to scriptures. A while back when reading this chapter, I started to see God lays out a process and a template for all of us to walk in when it comes to new seasons in life or new territory that the Lord has given us. You know, in verse 1, it says that God created the heavens and the earth. And what's interesting is that we don't see the word created again until he mentions the animals and humans. And I find that very interesting because we've been taught that God created every day in the 6th day of creation, but he actually didn't. And God created the heavens and the earth before he started creating days. And from that point, he started to work with the formless and the void in creating boundaries and balances and structures and intentions in which this heaven and this earth, this blank slate, in which he could start producing and thriving. And I believe this is very important because when we understand God's way a little bit better, we understand how we're supposed to function because, we're made in his image and in his likeness. Basically, we're created to be like him. Sometimes we want everything in our pretty little worlds just to come instant, not have to go through a process of seeing things grow and come into a place of fruition. We just want it instant. We want God just to come in and create it out of nothing and bypass the process. I've seen people go decades waiting for that creation moment in their lives, but I could almost hear God saying, I've given you your blank slate. I've given you your heavens and your earth. And I've given you this formless and void. Now do as I've taught you. Work with me to create those balances and those boundaries, those structures and those intentions. For all that I've given you in order for them to come to a place of producing and thriving. It's interesting, we get so hung up on the creation part, when the creation part, although it is needed, it's a very small portion of what's going on here. It's part of it, but it's not all of it. Zechariah 4:10 says this, "Do not despise small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin." What he's saying is, the Lord rejoices in the process. The Lord loves to see things start as a seed and then grow and grow and grow. And we see it from the very beginning of the scriptures. Even the kingdom talks about how it starts at a seed and it continues to grow and to grow and to grow. Many times God gives us a blank slate, or he takes us into a new phase of life or a new season. It could be this new place of stepping into a marriage or having a child or starting a new business or organization. It could be as a young adult stepping out and doing life on your own outside of your parents' house. It could be a new job, a new career, a new place to live, or even moving out of state or out of city. These are places of new territory for you. They're a place where a blank slate is given to you and where to go in and start shaping that formless and void in order for it to start producing. When God calls you into a new place, that is your formless and your void moment in which you move into and you work with God in creating balances and boundaries and structures and intentions for that new place. Because if you don't, that territory is going to remain formless and void, and it will produce no good thing for you. Without balances in place, your territory will do its own thing, and it'll grow out of control. It'll just remain unfruitful. Think about this. Even in the Garden of Eden that God created, what did he do? He set man in it. And as the scriptures say, he put man in it to tend it and to keep it, to take care of it. Our territory needs taken care of. The territory in which God has given you, it needs tended to and it needs kept. So let's jump into this process of the sixth day of creation that every man and woman must go through in order to see abundance and in order to thrive. Genesis 1:1, as we just read, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, the territory. This speaks to the territory that God has allotted to you. And it's important to define what that territory is. If you can't define what your territory is, you don't know what you're supposed to be tending to and keeping. You'll be lost. You have to define that garden that God has put you in. That place that He's given you to tend and to keep. And it's that place where God is found. It's that place where righteousness is found. It's that place where things flow for you. And some people, think that this is like some big, hard thing to figure out, but it's really not. I can remember where I came to this place where life got super confusing for me. And I remember jumping in my truck, finding a parking lot, getting alone with God. And I grabbed a pen and a piece of paper. And I just wrote down those things which God had put in my life that I knew were from Him and I knew that I needed to be about. I started to define what my territory is. And it was simple things like, I know that I'm supposed to be in relationship with Him. So number 1 was my relationship with the Father. Number 2 is I knew the church that God had called me to and I was supposed to be plugged in there. I knew that God had called me into a marriage, so that was on the list. I had Adam, my son. I knew that I was called to be a father, so that went on the list. And I had a business, and I knew I was to tend and to keep that business, so that went on the list. I had 5 things on my list, and that was it. I knew those places were my territory, and I began to manage and to keep those as the Lord led me in doing so. So first and foremost, you have to define what your territory is. Where has God placed you in life? What territory has He given you to reign over as a king and priest on this earth? And then we see in verse 2 where it says, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And I love that hovering part, because this hovering in Scripture speaks of an assessment. The Spirit of God was assessing the situation. It saw the formless and void. It was checking out what our territory is, where it's at, and what we're dealing with. I'm telling you, a proper assessment of what you're getting ready to step into will allow you to see more clearly in the direction you should go. It's going to allow you to bring about the proper balances and boundaries and intentions and structures. And we see this when God told the Israelites, I am giving you this land. What did they do? They sent spies into the land to assess it. Just like the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters, assessing this formless and void territory that God had created. And then as we're getting ready to read, God begins to implement a plan that would bring about abundant life in this territory that He had created. And then we move on to verse 3. Then God said, let there be light. And there was a light. And God saw that the light was good. And He separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and the darkness night. When you do a quick read of Genesis 1, you see that the light on this day was different than the light that comes later from the sun, the moon, and the stars. In this verse, He's speaking about His light, God's light. It speaks to bringing the light of God to our territory. A light that illuminates the path that we should take. It separates the good areas from the areas that need work, the light from the darkness. You've been given a blank slate. You've been given a formless and void territory. And when we assess the situation and start bringing light to it, it starts creating that path for answers. But the deal is, we don't have to walk this out alone. Like I said, this is the light of God. We're walking with Christ. We're walking with the Spirit of God. We're walking with the Father to create a land that's full of milk and honey. We're not doing this alone. We get to walk with the Creator himself, who has given us this territory and has an intention for it. And he will guide us and lead us in the best way to walk this out. I like how Proverbs 19:21 puts it. It says, "Many are the plans of a man's heart, but the counsel of the Lord will stand." We are to walk this out with him. Why would we ever want to walk it out any other way? This is the way we were created. We were created to walk these things out with him. I like to say that doing it on our own, it's a hit and miss deal. It may work and it may not. It probably won't. But when we walk as we should, as a son of God, and when we go to the Father and get counsel from him, it will surely work. There's no chance that it won't. Like I said, choosing to bring God's light to this new territory ensures an illuminated path. It reveals areas that need attention, those dark areas. And many times it's only the light of God that can reveal those places, because we can't see them with our naked eye. It's important to identify these areas because going undealt with, these areas will definitely cause you problems. And I know this from experience. I like this because God always confronts things. He never puts things aside. Just think about that. He never puts things aside. This is the justice side of God. He confronts things. He wants things to be laid out on the table. Let's see the reality of the situation. Good or bad, let's put it out on the table. We'll assess it, we'll deal with it, and then we'll move forward from there. So it is with us. We are to deal with these dark areas and bring the light of God to them, and even the life of God to them, in order to produce the abundant life that God has called our territory to be. And I like how this passage ends. It says, "And it was evening, and it was morning, the first day." I went through a season where I was just hitting the ground running every morning. No time for nothing. Just get up, brush my teeth, wash my face, do my hair, and hit the ground running. Dealing with issues, dealing with problems, taking it as it comes. Taking the hits and doing the best I can to survive. I was running ragged. I was burnt out. I was frustrated. And God began to show me that I needed to slow down. Chill out. Enter into this place of rest and to start my day from a place of rest. And that's what I see in this. Evening time is a time of resting. And then we sleep all through the night. And then morning comes. And we can tackle our day from that place of rest and sleep. That place of rejuvenation. And when God showed me this, I began to start tackling my day from that place of God's rest. From that place of just taking a moment and getting alone with the Father and realizing I have everything I need for this day. I have all the answers. I am fully equipped. I don't have to let life run me. And I don't have to run ragged. I don't have to respond to everything that's always flying in my face. I am approaching this day from a place of rest in Christ Jesus. I'm telling you, that simple mindset changes everything. So day one is to define what your territory is to make an assessment of your territory and to bring the light of God to this territory. All three of those work together. Let's move into day two. It says in Genesis 1:6, "Then God said, 'Let there be a space between the waters to separate the waters of heavens from the waters of the earth.' And that is what happened. God made this space to separate the waters from earth from the waters of the heavens. And God called the space sky. And evening passed and morning came, marking the second day." What I see in this is that to fully bring this new place into the fullness of what God has called it to be, we need to understand that this is going to take heaven's involvement. The rains of heavens must fall on your territory here on earth. The territory that God has given you requires heaven and earth to work together to bring it to its fullness. It's going to take more than just your earthly things to make this happen. Jesus taught us to pray on earth as it is in heaven. In other words, we need a pouring from heaven. We need rain from heaven to pour down on our earthly territory. We need heaven manifested on this earth. As I've taught in past messages, just as things need minerals, and just as things need the sun and water to survive, just as much, if not more so, all things need righteousness in order to flourish also. And this is what I'm talking about. We need heaven's involvement in order for our territory to come into the fullness of what God's called it to be. And moving on to day 3. Genesis 1:9, and then God said, let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place, so the dry ground may appear. And that is what happened. And God called the dry ground land, and the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the land sprout with vegetation, every sort of seed-bearing plant, seeds that grow seed-bearing fruit. And these things will then produce the kinds of plants and trees which they came. And that is what happened. The land produced vegetation, and all sorts of seed-bearing plants, and the trees with seed-bearing fruit. And their seeds produced plants and trees of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. And evening and morning came, marking the 3rd day. Did you know that land in the scriptures represents God's holy place? It's God's holy land. It's holy ground. It's the place from which things produce from and come from. It's the place in which the saints of God are to make their dwelling. And we see that over and over again. I give you the land. Make your dwelling place in this land. He's saying, this is the holy ground I've given you. And also, if you didn't know, the sea in scriptures represent the world's ways and the things outside of God's holy ground. The seas have its place, but we aren't to make our permanent dwelling place in the sea. And if you notice in this passage that we read, it talks about the increase, the growth, the seeds producing. Where do they produce at? On the land. It doesn't say they produce in the sea. In other words, your abundance is found in the holy place. Your abundance is found on holy ground. It's found in the territory that God has called you to. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that since the sea represents the world's ways and the world's way of doing things, we are to be separate from that. The world has its place. The seas have its place. But we're not to make our dwelling place in the seas. We're not to conduct ourselves the way the seas conduct themselves. That doesn't work well. We'll drown. And God's not called us to drown in the world's ways. He's called you to stay in your territory, that holy place. And that place is where the seeds produce and grow fruit. Sometimes we have to go to the seas to do our business, and that's fine. It's interesting out there sometimes. You see dolphins swimming around. We can make friends with the dolphins. We can check out the sea turtles. Everybody likes those. Everybody likes the sea turtles. We find them fascinating and we love them. But we don't start acting like a sea turtle. We don't try to start mimicking what a sea turtle does. It just doesn't work right for us. And our abundance can't be found in doing things like a sea turtle does. God says to be separate and come out from among them. Come out from among the world. We've been set free from that bondage of the world system. And to try and conform and to adapt to the world's ways will not mix with what we're trying to achieve. Matter of fact, it's going to tear down the very thing you're trying to build. We have to keep our eyes on the territory that God has given us, not the rest of the seas. So moving on to day 4, Genesis 1:14. Then God said, let the lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs to mark the seasons, the days and the years. Let these lights in the sky shine down on the earth. And that is what happened. God made the two great lights, the larger one to govern the day and the smaller one to govern the night. He also made the stars. And God set these lights in the sky to light the earth and to govern the day and night and to separate the light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And evening passed and morning came, marking the fourth day. What's going on in day 4 is the establishment of seasons. And seasons are important because each season calls for specific things. For example, I don't dress in the winter the way I dress in the middle of the summer. I'll freeze. The things I do in the fall, I don't do in the spring. Take a farmer, for example. He doesn't plant his seed in the middle of the winter. He plants in the spring. So what I'm trying to say is each season that God has called you to in this territory requires something different. And understanding and discerning your season is key to your success in this new territory. You guys know some of the messages that I carry. And I went years where God was just downloading things in me and giving me revelation and insight. And everything in me wanted to run to the world and just tell everybody about it. But the Lord wouldn't allow me. Even in conversations with certain people, I would take them out to dinner in hopes that I could share this message with them. I'd bring my notes and everything. And I would sit down before them and the Lord would say, no, now's not the time. Keep it quiet. It wasn't the season to do it yet. But one day that season finally came for me to start proclaiming what God had been downloading in me for years. And that season came after I was established in it. After I knew what I was talking about. After I knew it through and through. And after I knew how to communicate it. In the seasons before, I wasn't established in it as I thought I was. I couldn't articulate it in the way that God wanted me to yet. I was still in this process of learning and growing and being established in it. All things have their season. I've seen businesses grow out of their seasons way too quick, jump way too far ahead, and nearly go under because they started functioning out of season. They're trying to skip the process of what the other seasons are bringing you to. There's a process in seasons. Like I said, a farmer, he plants in spring, and then there's a season of growing and watering and watching your plant mature. And then late fall, there's that time of harvest. We want to be a people who are led by the Lord in discerning what season we are in and to bring forth what that season calls for. Super important. Day 5, verse 20. Then God said, "Let the waters swarm with fish and other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind." So God created the sea creatures and every living thing that scurries and swarms in the water, and of every sort of bird, each producing offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply. Let the fish fill the seas. Let the birds multiply on the earth." And evening passed, and morning came, marking the 5th day. God created all things with a purpose. Each thing is unique, and each thing plays a part. I see this as like God saying, let things be. You do you, and let them do them. You're not in a competition. You're not here to be concerned about what everything else is doing. Just be about your Father's business for your territory. Don't worry about all these other things going on around you. I got that taken care of. That's not what I've called you to. I've called you to your territory. You know, the scriptures say to be at peace with everyone as long as you can help it. And I believe that sums it up. Just let it be. Who cares if they're doing the same thing you're doing? It doesn't matter. He's called you to do that, and he may have called them to do the same thing, but in a different way. You need to be about your Father's business, not about what they're doing. Stay focused on what God has set before you and keep it as simple as that. And then day 6, verse 20. Then God said, "Let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind of livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground and wild animals." And that is what happened. God made all sorts of wild animals and livestock and small animals, each able to produce offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. I'm convinced that every vision that God gives, you cannot do it alone. You're going to have to go outside of yourself to gain help and resources in fulfilling what God has laid on your heart. I've been in business most of my life, and my biggest mistake has been to try and handle all things myself. Huge mistake. And I've learned it over and over again. One person can only do so much. And definitely, one person can only do so much well. It's not the way it was meant to be. He created us for community. When you're doing it all on your own, you're going to be left worn out, burnout. It's going to drain your resources. And most of all, it's going to hinder the growth of the territory that God has set before you. I'm telling you, I've seen it so many times in my own life. The verse goes on to say, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them and said, 'Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it.'" To put this really plainly, it takes community to achieve the fullness of what God has for your territory. It's the way he designed it. We need each other. We need each other to help achieve each other's callings, each other's visions, and each other's dreams. We need it. We need each other to have true accountability, to encourage each other to keep going when we want to give up. We need people in our lives to call out our unwise ways, to say, "No, Serge, don't do it that way. What are you thinking? Talk this out with me first. Let me help you." We need people in our lives that will jump in the game with us and take a few swings with us. We need true kingdom community to pull on and to immerse ourselves in. And the scripture continues on to say, "Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." In other words, don't let things run you. You run things. This is a powerful truth. You don't let life rule you. You rule it. He's called us to have dominion. We know this. We see that God tells him to have dominion over your territory. Don't let your territory have dominion over you. Don't let the rest of the world overtake you. You stay in a place of tending and keeping this territory. I'm telling you, it's easy to get that flipped around, where you start responding to all your issues, and next thing you know, your issues are driving you. That's not the way it's supposed to be. I see this so many times in ministry and business. I've seen it so many times through the years, where businesses will get so out of control that the boss stays in a constant state of just reacting to the problems, and it starts draining their time, their energy, and their resources. They spend all their time just putting out fires instead of getting ahead of the game, getting ahead of the situation, and leading from a place of success, from that place of rest. We even see it with people in their everyday lives, where things get so out of control and we become victim to the situations we're in instead of stepping back, assessing the things we're facing, bringing the light of God to them, getting the answers from the Almighty Father, and walking these things out in order to change that situation and begin to rule life once again from a place of rest, to bring it to abundance and fruitfulness. And we all know day 7. And God saw all that he had done. And God saw that it was good. And God rested. God rested on that 7th day. My friends, if we take this 6-day process of creation and implement it into our lives, into our territory, into the places that God has given us, we'll come to this place where we enter into rest, and we can look back and see the balances and boundaries, the structures and the intentions that we've put in place with the help of the Holy Spirit, and watch them produce this life that God has called our territory to be, a place of overflow, fruitfulness, and abundance. This is the place that the Lord has called you to. That seventh day, the place of rest. But in order to step into that seventh day, we must take the formless and void territory that He's given us and work with Him to implement these balances and boundaries, to implement these structures and intentions that will begin to work and bring us to this place of rest. Thank you for listening. You can find more resources on our website at BreakAwayKingdomHub.com.